There have been many great figures throughout history, leaders, kings, philosophers and warriors, each leaving their mark on the world in different ways. Some ruled with power, others with wisdom, and some through influence and innovation. But there is one who stands above them all. One whose life, though lived in humility, carried a purpose greater than any throne or empire. His greatness was not measured by earthly standards, yet his impact is unmatched. He had no political position, no military might, no material wealth to escape his name. Yet he changed the course of history forever. His identity was unlike any other. He was born in a place of simplicity, raised not in a palace but in an ordinary home. There was no grand announcement of his arrival to the world's elite, yet heaven itself declared his coming. The stars aligned and messengers from above proclaimed that something extraordinary had taken place. His birth did not shake the foundations of earthly kingdoms, but it was the beginning of a revolution that would change the hearts of men and women for generations to come. He walked among the people, yet he was different from them. He spoke with authority, yet his words carried the weight of love, not dominance. People who heard him knew there was something about him that set him apart. He did not seek to elevate himself, though he had every right to. He did not demand honor, though he was worthy of it. Instead, he humbled himself, choosing to serve rather than be served. His purpose was clear from the very beginning. He did not come for personal gain. He did not seek the approval of the powerful or the applause of the crowds. He came for those whom the world had overlooked, the broken, the rejected, the weary. His mission was one of redemption, one that stretched beyond what the human mind could comprehend. He saw the needs of the people, but more than that, he saw the condition of their souls. While others looked at outward appearances, he looked at the heart. He did not come to establish an earthly empire. He came to bring something far greater, a kingdom not built with hands, but one that would last for eternity. And yet, despite his divine purpose, he was questioned, doubted, and misunderstood. The world could not grasp how true greatness could come wrapped in humility. How could someone so powerful choose to live so simply? How could someone with such authority choose to walk among the lowly? Many expected him to rise as a conqueror, to overthrow rulers and take his place as a king, but he showed them a different kind of power. Not one that forced submission, but one that transformed lives from the inside out. He did not seek to take over governments. He came to change hearts. His identity was not shaped by titles or the recognition of others. He did not need validation because he knew who he was. He knew the mission he had been sent to fulfill, and he never wavered from it. Even in the face of rejection, he remained steadfast. Even when the world turned against him, he did not change his course. His confidence was not in human approval, but in the purpose for which he was sent. And though he was rejected by many, he never rejected those who came to him. He welcomed the outcasts, embraced the unwanted, and restored those who had been cast aside. He did not show favoritism. He did not seek alliances with the influential to elevate his status. He remained faithful to his calling, no matter the cost. And that is why he is the greatest man in history. Not because of the power he held, but because of the way he used it. Not because of the recognition he received, but because of the lives he touched. Not because of a throne he sat upon, but because of the sacrifice he made. His greatness was never about himself. It was always about others. And that is why his name is still spoken, his message still followed, and his impact still felt to this day. While others built kingdoms that crumbled, he established something that will never fade. And when all is said and done, history will continue to declare that there has never been and never will be another like him. The world has known many teachers, philosophers, and scholars whose words have shaped societies and influenced cultures. Their ideas have been written in books, studied in universities, and passed down through generations, but none have spoken words that carried the weight, the authority, and the undeniable truth like the greatest man in history. His teachings were not just lessons, they were revelations. They were not theories to be debated, but truths to be lived. Every word he spoke had purpose, and every sentence carried power. He did not teach to impress, he did not speak to gain a following, he did not craft his words to please the ears of those who listened. He spoke because he was the truth itself. His words did not depend on human understanding, yet they reached into the hearts of those who heard them, simple enough for a child to grasp, yet profound enough to confound the greatest minds. His teachings were not limited to the intellect. They spoke to the soul. They cut through pretenses, through pride, through empty traditions, and went straight to the deepest parts of the human heart. And he did not just speak, he lived what he taught. There was no contradiction between his words and his actions. When he taught about love, he demonstrated it. When he spoke of forgiveness, he extended it. When he commanded faith, he walked in it. Unlike the religious leaders of his time who burdened the people with laws they themselves could not keep, he carried no hypocrisy. He was the very embodiment of the truth he proclaimed. People flocked to hear him, not because he spoke with eloquence, but because he spoke with authority. His words were different from the empty rhetoric of the day. He did not offer shallow motivation or temporary comfort. He spoke words that awakened the soul, words that brought life to the lifeless, hope to the hopeless, and light to those trapped in darkness. He told the people that the greatest commandment was to love, not just those who were easy to love, but even those who opposed them. He shattered the idea that love was only for the deserving. His teachings were not comfortable. They challenged everything the world had accepted. They went against human nature, against pride, against selfishness. Love your enemies, bless those who persecute you, forgive not just once, but over and over again. Who could live up to such a standard? And yet he did. He spoke of humility in a world that glorified power. He taught that the first would be last, and the last would be first. He said that true greatness was found in serving, not in being served. The world had never heard anything like this before. It was radical, it was unsettling, and yet it was undeniably true. His words did not just challenge individuals, they disrupted entire systems. The powerful feared him because he spoke of a kingdom that was greater than theirs. A kingdom not built with armies, not maintained by force, but one that would never end. They tried to silence him, tried to trap him in his words, but they could not outsmart the wisdom that was beyond human comprehension. He taught in parables, stories that held deeper truths, revealing mysteries to those willing to listen while confounding those who refused to see. He spoke of lost sheep, lost coins, and lost sons, reminding us that no one is too far gone, that redemption is always possible. He painted pictures of faith the size of a mustard seed, of houses built on rock instead of sand, of vineyards, banquets, and treasures hidden in fields. And every story carried a deeper meaning, every example revealing something about the heart of God. And yet, despite all the wisdom, all the truth, and all the love in his words, many still rejected him. They heard but did not listen. They saw but did not believe. The same words that brought life to some became a stumbling block to others. And even now, though his words remain unchanged, the response to them is still divided. But for those who do listen, for those who truly hear, his teachings transform everything. They change how we see ourselves, how we see others, and how we see the world. They offer not just knowledge, but life itself. And that is why, thousands of years later, his words have not faded. They have not lost their power. They are still speaking, still reaching, still changing hearts. Because truth does not expire, and wisdom that comes from above will never pass away. There is a kind of love the world cannot fully understand. A love so pure, so selfless, so relentless that it defies human logic. The greatest man in history did not just speak of love. He lived it, breathed it, and poured it out without condition. In a world where love is often given in exchange for something, where it is measured by convenience or dictated by emotions, his love stood apart. It was unwavering. It was sacrificial. It was a love that sought nothing in return, yet gave everything. He did not love selectively. He did not reserve his love for those who were righteous, powerful, or deserving. He reached out to the outcasts, the sinners, the broken, and the forgotten. Where others saw rejection, he saw redemption. Where others saw failure, he saw possibility. His love was not bound by status, wealth, or reputation. He touched those whom society had cast aside, healed those whom the world had ignored, and welcomed those whom religion had condemned. His love was for the least, the lost, and the lonely. He did not hesitate to embrace those whom others feared to be associated with. A leper, unclean and shunned, came to him, and instead of turning away, he reached out and touched him, restoring not only his body but his dignity. A woman caught in the very act of sin was dragged before him, humiliated and condemned, yet he defended her, silencing her accusers with wisdom and offering her grace instead of judgment. A tax collector, hated by his own people, was called down from a tree, not with rebuke, but with an invitation to share a meal, an act that spoke of acceptance and transformation. And his love was not just in grand gestures, it was in the small, quiet moments too. It was in the way he saw people, truly saw them, not just for who they were, but for who they could be. It was in the way he paused when others hurried past, in the way he listened when others dismissed, in the way he wept when others remained indifferent. His love was not passive, it was active. It was not mere words, it was action. But the depth of his love was not just in how he cared for the broken or how he lifted up the weary. The depth of his love was seen in its greatest expression, the willingness to suffer for the sake of those he loved. True love is not just in kind words or generous acts, it is in sacrifice. He was betrayed by one whom he had walked with, one whom he had taught, one whom he had trusted. He was abandoned by those who had sworn their loyalty. He was falsely accused, mocked, beaten, and humiliated. And yet, even in the midst of suffering, his love did not waver. As he carried the weight of injustice, as he endured pain beyond what the human body should bear, he did not curse those who tormented him. He did not fight back. Instead, he spoke words that the world had never heard before. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." That is love. Love that forgives in the face of betrayal. Love that endures in the face of suffering. Love that does not demand vengeance but offers mercy. Love that lays itself down for others. And that love did not end with his suffering. It did not stay buried in the tomb. It is still alive today, still reaching, still transforming, still calling out to those who need it. His love was not just for those who walked the earth when he did. It was for all generations, for all people, for all time. It is for the broken and the whole, the strong and the weak, the ones who seek him and the ones who have yet to realize how deeply they are sought. That love is the greatest force in history. It has outlived empires, outlasted rulers, and overcome darkness. It is the love that has changed hearts, restored lives, and turned enemies into brothers. It is the love that cannot be earned, yet is freely given. And it is the love that still calls to us today, inviting us not just to receive it, but to live it, to share it, to embody it. Because in the end, the greatest legacy is not power, not wealth, not influence, but love. The kind of love that he lived, the kind of love that still remains. The greatest man in history did not just speak of power, he demonstrated it. He did not just claim authority, he proved it. His power was not like that of kings or rulers who depend on armies and wealth to maintain their control. His power was different. It was undeniable, unstoppable, yet full of purpose and compassion. It was not a power that sought to dominate, but a power that sought to restore. It was a power that changed lives, healed the sick, calmed the storms, and even defied death itself. He walked among the weak, but he himself was never weak. When he spoke, nature obeyed. When he commanded, sickness fled. When he touched, the broken were made whole. There was no disease too advanced, no affliction too severe, no condition too hopeless for him. A blind man who had never seen light had his eyes opened with just a touch. A paralyzed man who had spent years confined to his mat stood up and walked at his command. A woman who had suffered for over a decade found healing simply by reaching out in faith. There was no limit to his power, no boundary to what he could do. And yet, he never used his power for personal gain. He never performed miracles to impress crowds or to prove himself to skeptics. He was not a performer seeking applause. Every miracle had a purpose. Every act of power carried meaning. When he turned water into wine, it was not to show off. It was an act of kindness. When he fed thousands with only a handful of food, it was not to draw attention. It was to meet the needs of the hungry. When he walked on water, it was not for spectacle. It was to show his disciples that faith is stronger than fear. Even the forces of nature bowed to him. When a violent storm threatened to sink the boat he was in, he stood and spoke just 3 words, "Peace, be still." And the wind and waves obeyed. Those who were with him were astonished, asking, "Who is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" But it was never a question of his ability. It was a revelation of who he was. But perhaps the greatest display of his power was not in the miracles he performed, not in the wonders he displayed, but in the authority he had over death itself. A young girl had passed away, and her family was weeping, convinced that all hope was gone. But he entered the room, took her by the hand, and told her to rise, and she did. A widow was walking in a funeral procession for her only son, the grief unbearable, the finality of death closing in. But he interrupted the procession, spoke life into the young man, and he sat up, alive once more. And then there was Lazarus, dead for 4 days, sealed in a tomb beyond all possibility of revival, yet with just 3 words, "Lazarus, come forth." He walked out of the grave, restored, breathing, alive. And yet, despite all of this, there were still those who doubted him, who refused to believe, who rejected the very power that could save them. And so, in the ultimate test, he allowed himself to be arrested, beaten, humiliated, and crucified. He allowed death to take him, not because he was powerless, but because his power was beyond human understanding. He had the ability to call down legions of angels to rescue him, but he chose not to. He had the power to stop his suffering, but he endured it. The greatest power is not in what one can take, but in what one can give. And he gave everything. But even then, death could not hold him. 3 days later, the stone was rolled away and the grave was empty. The one who had raised others from the dead had now conquered death himself. His power had no limits, no equal, no end. And because of that, death no longer has the final say. Fear no longer holds the victory. Darkness no longer prevails. The power he carried was not just for the past, it is still alive today. It still heals, restores, and transforms. It still brings hope where there is none, peace where there is chaos, and life where there is death. And no matter how much time passes, no matter how much the world changes, his power remains. Because true power, the kind that does not fade, does not break, and does not fail, belongs to him alone. The greatest man in history did not come to be served, but to serve. He did not seek status, recognition, or praise. Though he had every right to demand honor, he chose humility instead. In a world where power is measured by how many serve you, he redefined greatness by showing that true strength is found in service. He knelt where others would have stood tall. He washed feet when others would have expected their own to be washed. He embraced humility not as a burden, but as the very essence of love. He walked among the people, not above them. He did not separate himself from the poor, the broken, or the sinners. He dined with tax collectors, spoke with outcasts, and touched those whom society deemed untouchable. He made time for children when others dismissed them. He stopped for the forgotten, the overlooked, the unseen. He was never too busy, never too distant, never too important to care. And in all of this, he showed that service is not a task, it is a way of life. He did not just serve those who loved him, he served even those who would betray him. On the night before his greatest suffering, when he could have sought comfort, he chose instead to kneel before his disciples and wash their feet. It was the work of a servant, a task meant for the lowest in the household. Yet the greatest among them took the lowest position, showing them that love is not about power, it is about sacrifice. He washed the feet of Peter, who would soon deny him. He washed the feet of Judas, who had already plotted to betray him. And still, he did not withhold his love, because true service does not depend on the worthiness of the one being served. It flows from the heart of the one who serves. He taught that the greatest in the kingdom is not the one who seeks a throne, but the one who takes up a towel. That honor is not found in being lifted high, but in being willing to go low. That leadership is not about control, but about care. And he did not just speak these things, he lived them. He demonstrated that real authority is not found in demanding obedience, but in giving oneself for others. The world did not understand his kind of service. It made no sense to those who believed power should be asserted, not surrendered. They could not comprehend why a man with such wisdom, such miracles, such influence would lower himself to such humility. But he knew that the way to truly lead is to serve, and the way to truly love is to give. Even in his final moments he was serving. As he hung on the cross in agony, mocked and rejected, he thought not of himself, but of those around him. He spoke words of forgiveness for those who nailed him to that tree. He comforted a criminal who hung beside him. He ensured his mother would be cared for after he was gone. Even in death, his heart was for others. And in the ultimate act of service, he gave his life. Not because he had to, but because he chose. No greater love exists than to lay down one's life for another, and he did just that. But his service did not end with his death. It continues. Because what he did was not just for those who walked with him then, it was for all who would ever come to know him. His love is still reaching, his sacrifice is still saving, his example is still calling us to live as he lived. He did not serve for a moment, he served for eternity. And now he invites us to do the same. Because if the greatest man in history, the one with all authority, all power, all dominion, chose to serve, then how much more should we? If he who deserved the highest throne chose the lowest place, how can we do anything less? The world may chase power, but he has shown us a better way. A way that does not fade, does not fail, and does not end. The way of love, the way of humility, the way of true greatness. The greatest man in history did not just come to make an impact for a moment. He came to change the course of eternity. His life was not just another story among many. His presence did not fade with time. His influence did not diminish with age. Long after he walked this earth, his name is still spoken with reverence, his words are still studied with devotion, and his legacy continues to transform lives. Kings and rulers have risen and fallen. Empires have been built and destroyed. Philosophers have shared wisdom, and their words have faded. But he remains. His name has outlasted history's most powerful leaders. His teachings have endured beyond the limits of time. His love has never wavered. His power has never weakened, and his presence has never left us. No movement, no government, no force of opposition has ever been able to erase him. The world has tried to silence him, to dismiss him, to deny him, but still he remains. Because what he brought to this world was not just an idea or a philosophy, it was truth, and truth cannot be undone. He is not a distant figure of the past. He is not a memory confined to history books. He is alive. His influence is not just something we read about, it is something we experience. He is not just remembered, he is known. Because what he offered was not just inspiration, but transformation. He did not come just to be followed, he came to bring salvation. And that salvation was not just for the people of his time, it was for every generation to come. It was for us, it was for now. Even those who do not believe in him cannot deny the impact he has had. The calendar is divided by his life. Nations have been shaped by his teachings, millions have laid down their lives for his name. Wars have been fought and lives have been changed because of what he stood for. But his true legacy is not in the institutions that bear his name, nor in the traditions that seek to honor him. His true legacy is in the hearts of those who have encountered. It is in the addict who finds freedom, the broken who find healing, the lost who find purpose. It is in the countless lives that have been rewritten by his grace. And though centuries have passed, though the world has changed in ways unimaginable, he has not changed. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He still speaks, he still moves, he still reaches out with the same love, the same power, the same mercy that he did when he first walked among us. His words are not outdated. His truth is not irrelevant. What he offered then, he offers now. Hope for the hopeless, rest for the weary, peace for the troubled. And just as he called people to follow him then, he still calls people today. There is no other name in history that has carried such weight. No other figure who has shaped the world so completely. No other man who has conquered death, not just for himself, but for all who would believe in him. His story did not end in the grave, and neither does ours. His victory was not just for him, it was for all of us. And because he lives, hope lives. Because he reigns, we have a future. Because he is who he said he is, we can stand firm in the truth that nothing, no power, no trial, no darkness can separate us from the love he has given. This is why his name still stands above all names, why his story is still told, why his presence is still felt. Because he is not just the greatest man in history. He is the reason history exists at all. And long after every earthly kingdom has faded, long after every monument has crumbled, long after time itself has reached its end, he will remain.